So I think it's been about 10 days since the former, as I call her, the deposed Attorney General, Jody Wilson-Raybould, testified before the Justice Committee in Ottawa. And in that short period, a great many things have happened. I guess the most important probably is that her colleague, the former Treasury Board boss, Jane Philpott, resigned from Cabinet, specifically citing the SNC Lavalin case, the same way the Prime Minister managed it and people in his office managed it, as had Jody Wilson-Raybould cited that as her reason for ultimately resigning from Cabinet. Anyway, so that happened. The Prime Minister's former Principal Secretary, Jerry Butts, testified before the Justice Committee. The Clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Wernick, was brought back again to testify. The Deputy Justice Minister testified again. And then later this week, the Prime Minister himself, Justin Trudeau, had a press conference. He, of course, didn't testify, so it doesn't probably carry the same legitimacy that the testimony does before the committee. Anyway, at the end of that period, what do we now know about Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony? Well, we know that it stands up pretty well. She emerged, her evidence at that committee was pretty much untouched by all of the evidence or statements of the people that I mentioned in the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office. In other words, she said that the Prime Minister, the clerk, officials from the Prime Minister's office and others had leaned on her to change her mind. Justin Trudeau himself confirmed that indeed on September 17th last year, she told him and the clerk Wernick that her mind was made up. She was not going to overrule her Director of Public Prosecutions, and she was not going to intervene in the case, the criminal prosecution against SNC Lavalin, a company with a very checkered record worldwide, it should be noted. Even little details. She said one of the things, for instance, the Prime Minister said in that meeting was, I'm the member from Papineau, I'm from Quebec. And this was in the context of there being an upcoming Quebec election. And a remark that JWR, as everyone calls her, Wilson-Raybould, interpreted, I think correctly, as political pressure. So really the essential details, and Gerald Butts said, heavens, no, we didn't pressure her. He was completely bewildered and surprised, he said, when he found out that she'd interpreted his conversations with her as pressure. He just had no idea. There was a breakdown in trust. The Prime Minister said much the same thing. The clerk said much the same thing. None of them could point to any evidence, new evidence, fresh evidence, which would have given the former Attorney General reason to have another look at giving SNC Lavalin this DPA, as it's called, this deferred prosecution agreement, which would have given them essentially an out from having a criminal conviction, which, by the way, is very much in doubt. The case has only been through the preliminary hearing. We don't even have the judge's decision yet as to whether it's going to proceed to trial. But I guess the important things really are that Jody Wilson-Raybould's evidence, at least in my view, and that's all this ever is, was pretty much unscathed by the subsequent things that we've learned this week. And there are so many other institutions and Canadian conventions which have been damaged, in my view, by this scandal. It's not just that the PM and the people in the PM deliberately tried to skirt the law. The law on deferred prosecution agreements says the prosecutor must not consider the national economic interest. That means they're not supposed to consider such things as jobs, even the most precious jobs of all, of course, in Quebec. So by urging her to revisit this issue, to open herself up to a second opinion, perhaps the clerk and the Prime Minister suggested from an eminent jurist, such as a retired Supreme Court judge, they were trying to get her to skirt the law. She didn't do it. We know that now. is that as there are a couple of many lawyers in the country, I think, who believe that that amounts to either an attempt to obstruct justice or counseling Jody Wilson-Raybould to commit an offense which wasn't committed. That's a bizarre thing, but there is such a count in the criminal code. It isn't just the rule of law and prosecutorial independence which have been damaged. Why is SNC having all these conversations with the Prime Minister's office? Why do they have such enormous intimate access, even to the Prime Minister and the clerk of the Privy Council, ostensibly a civil servant? Why did that clerk accept a call from the chair of the board of SNC, who is himself, Kevin Lynch, a former clerk of the Privy Council, when he wouldn't take calls from other people? Why did Neil Bruce, the chairman or the CEO of SNC, feel perfectly free to write a heartfelt plea to the Prime Minister himself? How did that letter even get to the Prime Minister? So there's that. And then there's the notion that somehow there are Supreme Court judges out there, retired ones, who are so desperate for work that the Liberal Party, the Liberal government, can reliably hire them to give a favored second opinion on a decision like the one Jody Wilson-Raybould mentioned. She was right, she is right, they are wrong, end of story.